As a reporter, I've traveled the Middle East for many years. It's an area that has always fascinated me, but in my work, I've mainly covered its war zones, its crises, and its tragedies. This journey, which takes me down the Silk Road in the footsteps of Marco Polo, gives me the opportunity of exploring the great historical and cultural significance of this part of the world, its ancient melting pot of peoples and civilizations that have contributed so much to our own. We sometimes forget that Turkey actually begins in Europe, in the ancient province of Thrace, a piece of the old Ottoman Empire that has been pushed back to the southeastern corner of the Balkan Peninsula. The Turks and Islam have been at home here in Edirne since the 14th century, when the Silk Road's days of glory were starting to decline. What could be more fascinating, but also more uncertain, than the border between East and West? Where should it be drawn? In Venice or, for example, here in Edirne? Founded by the Roman Emperor Hadrian as Adrianople, it was conquered in 1361 by the Ottoman Turks, who made it the new capital of their empire, as well as a base for sending their armies off to conquer southern Europe. Situated just a few kilometers away from the borders of Bulgaria and Greece, Edirne is truly a Balkan city. From a bustling Ottoman metropolis during the era of the Silk Road, it shrank to a sleepy little town after the communist countries of Eastern Europe closed off their borders and the Iron Curtain came down. This is the legendary founder of modern Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the father of Turkish secularism, who gave women the right to vote and adopted the Latin alphabet for writing the Turkish language. Today is an ordinary day. There's no special celebration, but we can see that dozens of people have come to lay carnations at his feet. In an interesting juxtaposition of symbols, the father of modern secular Turkey stands at the foot of the Grand Mosque of Edirne. The Selimiye Mosque was commissioned by the great Sultan Selim II. Built in just 6 years and completed in 1574, it would go on to become a historic stronghold of Islam on the European continent. Around the mosque itself is a complex known as Kulliye, containing a school, a hospital, a library and a Turkish bath. This architectural masterpiece would serve as the model for all religious structures built by the Ottomans, with its 4 tapered minarets and, above all, its monumental dome, measuring 31 meters in diameter. It really is very spectacular. We've just entered the land of Islam, and this is our first mosque on the Silk Road. We couldn't have picked a better place to start, because this is the magnum opus of one of the greatest architects in history, Mimar Sinan, and this is the largest dome to be found in Ottoman architecture. Sinan was an architectural genius. For this mosque, he designed a system of 8 supporting pillars that hold up its enormous dome and create a vertiginous sense of perspective. The great mosque testifies to the grandeur of the Ottoman Empire, which at the time ruled over almost 1/3 of Europe. Today, the Thracian Turks are confined to a small region around Edirne, but they're still fiercely attached to the traditions inherited from their past. For example, traditional Turkish wrestling. Every year, the big annual tournament is held in Kirkpinar Stadium just outside the city. The Turkish word yagli güreş means fighting with oil, and as we can see, the wrestlers really are coating themselves with cooking oil. The oil is supposed to make the wrestling more difficult and more technical. Okay, everyone's got enough?
Okay.
Checker. Good luck, guys. The Penquer tournament is the most famous tournament in Turkey. It's held on the spot where the Janissary camp once stood. The Janissaries were the Ottoman Emperor's special shock troops. In fact, the gypsy drums and fifes reproduced the marching music of the elite corps mounting an attack. Legend has it that in the 14th century, two brothers fought each other in the Janissary camp. Neither was able to get the upper hand, and they ended up dying of exhaustion. The wrestlers wear extremely sturdy leather pants, which, since the oily bodies are hard to grip, their opponents try to grab in any way they can. These wrestlers are called pehlivan, from the Persian word meaning hero. And we can see where the French expression, strong as a Turk, comes from when we watch them. What's the connection between Turkish wrestling and the kind of wrestling that was practiced here back in ancient times? The Greeks oiled their bodies and wrestled on marble tables. And they were naked, while you're clothed. Why is that?
Yes, that's absolutely right. Wrestling is found in Greek mythology, but there we're talking about mythological times. Religions are born. The Islamic religion emerged. The world began to develop. Things aren't the same as they were. According to our religious beliefs, human health is extremely important. In other words, wrestling on marble is harmful to our health. And according to our beliefs, to Islamic principles, the lower part of the male body must be covered. So we wear leather pants, the kispit. All of the movements in oil wrestling are done so as not to harm the body.
Why do you cover yourselves in olive oil or sunflower oil?
We use oil because it's an essential part of the sport. It makes it much more difficult to seize your opponent when he's moving. In other styles of wrestling, you usually start off by grabbing the limbs. But in oil wrestling, we wrestle with the kispit, the leather pants, and not with the body. In other words, we have to grab the pants, focus on the kispit rather than on the opponent. Oil makes things more complicated, and it's been used since the very beginning. Of course, wrestling without oil exists too, but our wrestling tradition is with oil.
When you wrestle, do you feel like you're practicing a sport, or do you feel like you're preserving a very old cultural tradition?
Both. We practice a sport, we do wrestling, we train all the time.
Just like sumo wrestlers in Japan, oil wrestlers are highly respected in Turkey. It's a very difficult sport to do. And because it's so difficult, everybody respects them. In ordinary daily life, when people see them in town, at the market, anywhere, they give them respect. Everyone loves them. They have a special place in our lives.
How do you win in a wrestling match?
Well, let me explain it first by using one of our expressions. We say that if your belly sees the sun, you're the loser. Go ahead, show them a hold.
Right, that's a win. Okay, I can see it's over. On the outskirts of Edirne, the Bayezid II complex was built in the 15th century by the great Sultan Bayezid II. This is one of the most remarkable examples of a kulliye, that is, of a charitable foundation erected around a mosque. The complex is especially famous for its Dar el-Shifa, or House of Health. It was a state-of-the-art medical facility at the time, with a free hospital and a mental asylum that continued to operate until the Turco-Russian War of 1878. The historian Hakan Akinechi oversees the conservation of the site. Why did the Ottoman Empire decide to conquer Edirne and to make this city its capital? And why did it build such a lavish complex with a mosque and especially a hospital?
Edirne was a point of transit between the Silk Road and all the roads leading to the west. The Ottomans became aware of its importance, and they came here because it led to the Balkans and to Europe. Right away, they set about building this complex based on the idea of the welfare state. It was to do with giving importance to the human being. Sheikh Ebed Ali said, "Where human beings flourish, the state will flourish too." First, the imarets were built, kitchens that gave free meals to the poor. In the area just behind us, for example, free meals were served for 150 people. Next to it, there was a hospital, which was also free. Throughout the 15th, 16th, 17th and 18th centuries, patients came from all over Anatolia and the entire world.
We know that Arabic, Islamic, and by extension Turkish medicine was far ahead of Western medicine at the end of the Middle Ages. In what way? What was innovative here?
We know that all of the sciences and the arts in the 8th, 9th and 10th centuries were moving from east to west, with people like Al-Farabi, Al-Biruni and Avicenna. We also know that the trade routes, the Silk Road, the spice route, contributed to that. So if we take this place, the Bayezid II complex in the 15th century, treatments for the mentally ill included music, the sound of water, aromatherapy and different activities.
You spoke about medical knowledge that came here from Bukhara, about Avicenna, Ibn Sina. But this road was also known as the spice route. Were there spices or plants that were brought to the Balkans to be used as remedies in the hospital?
We know that the rose is a plant that came to us via the spice route, and many other kinds of products followed the same route west. An example of one of those products is rose syrup, which was used in the Bayezid II complex. Edirne was a major rose centre during the Ottoman era. The roses cultivated in this region were sent to the west and Anatolia. Later they were used in making various syrups, sherbets. At the Bayezid II complex, patients were fed rose syrup to calm them down. Here, roses were not only used in syrups, but also for their fragrance in treatments for the mentally ill and other patients.
The Ottoman Turks, who originally came from Asia to subsequently rule in Europe as far as the gates of Vienna, deserve our recognition. They were the intermediaries between two worlds who greatly contributed to the interchange of ideas and techniques that occurred along the Silk Road. There is one city, the most legendary of all, that epitomizes this coming together of Europe and the East, the intersection of Christianity and Ummah, the world of Islam. It is, of course, Istanbul. Once called the New Rome, it's now Turkey's largest city, with over 14 million inhabitants, as well as its economic and cultural nerve center. Dozens of remnants of the Silk Road can still be found here today. For example, the famous Hagia Sophia Basilica, where a young Marco Polo went to pray before starting off in his journey to China with his father and his uncle. It's now a mosque which overlooks the esplanade of the old Byzantine Hippodrome. It faces the famed Blue Mosque, which was built to be its counterpart in the 17th century. Bridging Europe and Asia, the Greco-Roman world and the Arab-Islamic world, Istanbul is still one of the world's most fascinating cities even today. It was founded as Byzantium. It then became Constantinople in 324, when the Emperor Constantine made it the eastern capital of the Roman Empire, and was finally conquered by the Turks in 1453. When the Turkish soldiers came through its gigantic walls, they found an almost deserted city. They even wondered where they were. The few remaining inhabitants told them in Greek, "Eisten Polin," you are in the city. That's the most probable etymology, Eisten Polin, Istanbul. The famous chestnuts of Anatolia. The Turks are nuts about them. On the Golden Horn, the estuary where Byzantium once built its boats, I'm intrigued by the sight of dozens of men who spend their days fishing off the bridge. They aren't doing this for fun. They're refugees from the Syrian civil war, which has forced millions of civilians into exile since 2011. Over the centuries, the Silk Road's routes constantly changed in relation to the wars that were being waged. To get to Bukhara, for example, the Byzantines avoided the Turkish Empire by traveling to the north of the Black Sea. In our case, we're going east, and in order to avoid the war in Syria, we'll be going through northern Turkey. History repeats itself. On the other side of the Golden Horn, the fortified Galata Tower overlooks the old Christian quarter. The current medieval structure is also called the Genoese Tower because merchants from the Italian city of Genoa established a colony in Constantinople. Genoa and Venice were commercial rivals, which meant that Venetians were no longer welcome on the banks of the Bosphorus. That's perhaps one reason why Niccolo and Maffeo Polo, Marco Polo's father and uncle, who were living in the city, decided to go further east in 1261 and try their luck in China. The Genoese tower and the city's formidable ramparts were supposed to make Constantinople impregnable, as was the spectacular Basilica Cistern, which was built in the 6th century to collect rainwater. The underground cistern is more than 100 meters long and supported by 336 Corinthian-style columns. Few places are able to give us a sense of the bygone splendor of Byzantium as this ancient reservoir. Istanbul lies on the Bosphorus, which in fact divides the old Greek city into two parts, separating Europe from Asia. Connecting the Black Sea to the Sea of Marmara and then to the Mediterranean, this strait is one of the busiest sea routes in the world. Overlooking the Sea of Marmara is the big industrial city of Bursa, with its nearly 3 million inhabitants. In the early 14th century, the city was also the capital of the burgeoning Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans tried their best to make Bursa the western terminus of the Silk Road. The city produced silk fabrics and enjoyed a monopoly in trading with the Europeans. For centuries, in order to maximize their profits, the Turks also tried to prevent raw silk from being exported and to keep the secret of silkworm breeding to themselves. The big merchants, who came for the most part from Persia, had to stay in this extraordinary two-story caravanserai, the Koza Khan, or Silk Bazaar. Turkish sericulture, which was extremely labor-intensive, flourished and then went into a decline. Today, most of the silks come from China or from Central Asia. However, another tradition is still going strong in Bursa, a tradition that has had a deep influence on the Turkish imagination, called Karagöz, or shadow puppet theatre. In his modest tourist shop in the bazaar, Sinazi Shelikol brings these humorous and impertinent puppets to life. Karagöz and his friend Hacivat are supposed to have been bricklayers in Bursa in the 16th century who were executed by the Sultan because they told so many funny stories that it slowed down the construction of a mosque.
Gelse oşuk meclise nazı tegafil eylese yelelel yelelel.
Oh my God! I've prepared the screen, turned on the light. My luck has changed in Bursa. As I was on my way to the Orhan Mosque, I met a strange man. His name was Karagöz. He's a gypsy. When we speak, everyone watches us.
This is shadow theatre we're talking about, so why are the puppets so colourful?
It's true that in Egyptian shadow theatre, everything is dark. There's no color at all.
Mesela Hindistan'da
But they use color, for example, in India, in Indonesia, in Thailand, and China.
Çin'de renkli. Karagöz'de işte halkın daha çok
Color is used because it attracts people's attention.
renkli yapılmış.
So that's why Karagöz puppets are colorful.
Tasvirler yapılmış.
In the old days, they were colored with
Şimdi bunları
alizarin.
kullanıyoruz. Esasında
Traditionally,
kök boya.
alizarin was made from plants or
Eski usulde
insects.
kök boya hazırlıyorlar.
That's how natural
Bitkiler,
colors were
böceklerden-
obtained, but not anymore.
böceklerden renk yapıyorlar.
Today, we use watercolor inks.
Şimdi artık yok.
Sinesi, why do you think Karagöz and Haşivat became so popular in Turkey?
Bunlar halkı temsil ettiği için,
Everyone liked them because they represented the people.
konuştukları için ve bazı
They spoke about things that people were interested in, and they talked about things like corruption.
halk bunları sevmiş. Yallah yallah, yallah yallah, yallah yallah, yallah, yallah yallah, yallah. Karagöz, yallah.
Karagöz, Karagöz, where is the dancer?
Efendim çengi gideli çok oldu.
She left a long time ago.
Karagöz'üm, nedir bu işte?
Oh, my Karagöz, what is this?
Çekiş, lan.
May the clergy break your head.
Yıktın perdeyi.
You've taken down the screen, now it's in pieces. I'm going to tell the host.
Hemen, haydi koş.
Well, best of luck. Please forgive us for any slip of the tongue.
Is Karagöz just as irreverent today as it was in the past?
Karagöz esasında çocuk
Karagöz is not, in fact, a show for
herkese
children.
yönelik. Yani
It's
üç
for
yaş,
everyone
dört
from
yaşından
3 to 4 years
80
old
yaşına
up to 80 or 90 years
insanlara
old.
hitap etmesi
Before
lazım.
the play
Karagöz
begins, the
sanatçısı
Karagöz
oyundan
puppeteer
önce
goes out in front of the
kendini
screen
çıkar,
and looks to
birer
see who's in the
bakar.
audience.
Ona göre
Then
cevap
he
verir.
improvises.
Gelmiş, Fransızcası iyi der.
For example, he says, Mrs. Sennel is here. She speaks French very well. And he'll throw out a couple of French
Yani
expressions.
Karagöz böyle
Or
enteresan
you might
bir şey.
say,
Politik.
there's Alfred, and say a few
Yani
words to
Karagöz dört
him.
bölüm. Giriş bölümü,
Karagöz performances are very flexible.
söyleşi. Esas oyun
Politics is also part of it.
ondan sonra bitiş.
A Karagöz play has 4 parts to it. The prologue, the dialogue, which is the longest part, the main play, and the epilogue. The last part is always humorous.
Günlük olaylara yer verir.
But in the second part, the dialogue, the Karagöz artist also talks about politics and current events. For example, he might say, well, my Karagöz, what's the matter? Oh, the situation is very bad in Syria, in Iraq. Or he might talk about Erdogan.
Karagöz onların
Nowadays, politicians pretend to like Karagöz, but in reality they don't, because the puppets make fun of them. That's why politicians don't really like Karagöz very much.
The Karagöz puppets are both light-hearted and serious at the same time, which can be a little bit perplexing. Their ambiguity is in fact much like the ambiguity of modern Turkey, a republic that is both secular and Islamist, turned towards Europe as well as towards the East. Located on the northwestern edge of Anatolia, Bursa was the last stop on the Silk Road's overland route. It was also from here that the Ottomans set out on their quest to expand their dynasty, and for several centuries, the Ottoman princes came back here to be buried in the Muradiye. The exteriors of the 12 main tombs, or türbe, were designed in the Byzantine style of architecture. The Ottomans thus remained faithful to their nomadic origins and continued the tradition of returning to be buried together with their families, all in the same place. Even if they'd gone off to distant lands or conquered half a continent in their lifetime, their final resting place would be at home in Bursa, in the complex of Sultan Murad II. In the mausoleums, the tombs of the sultans and other important persons can be identified by the fact that their turbans were placed on top of the sarcophagus. All around them, the stuccos and frescoes in the Oriental Rococo style have been considerably restored over the centuries. It was Sultan Murad's son, Mehmed II, known as the Conqueror, who finally captured Constantinople in 1453 and made it the new Turkish capital. A good way to catch a glimpse of the past and to see how the Turks once lived back in the times of the sultans and the final glory days of the Silk Road is to take the side roads and head towards the mountains that tower over the city of Bursa. At the foot of Mount Uludag, the village of Kumalikizik seems to have been frozen in time. For For centuries, passing through places such as these in Asia Minor were a must for travelers, painters, Orientalist scholars, or romantic poets in search of the misty lands of their fantasies of the East. Ever since then, the number of tourists wandering through the crafts and souvenir stalls has steadily grown. But they still come with the same desire to explore the architectural mazes of these Balkan-style villages, and to take in the atmosphere of an era in history when the Ottoman Empire was one of the most powerful in the world, an empire that was a bridge between Europe and the East along the Silk Road.